This is 11.2, Reasoning in Parallel Lines. First, we're going to look at corresponding angles. We already know that if corresponding angles are on parallel lines, then they are congruent. Therefore, we should also know that if they are congruent already, we already know that these two are congruent, then we have to know that these two lines are going to be parallel, because that's the only way that these two are going to be congruent. The same thing is true about alternate interior angles. We already know that alternate interior angles on parallel lines are congruent. So if they tell us that this angle and this angle are congruent, then we have to know that line A and B are parallel. The first thing I want you to notice is this symbol that looks like two L's right here means parallel to. So what that means is M is parallel to N, is what this means. Line M is parallel to line N. So here we want to know, is A going to be parallel to B? And we have to be able to justify our reasoning. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to look at these two angles. You should know from topic 11.1 that these are going to be corresponding angles. Corresponding angles are always equal to each other if they are on parallel lines. So because 59 equals 59, then line A and line B have to be parallel. So we're going to say yes, they are parallel, and that is because of corresponding angles. So corresponding angles on parallel lines are congruent. Therefore, 59 and 59 make A and B congruent or parallel. So we want to now know, is X and 82 parallel? So what value of X is line M parallel to line N? So line M and N are two lines, and we want to know if they are parallel, what does X have to be? Well, because these two are corresponding angles, then X has to equal 82 degrees. So X has to be 82 degrees because of corresponding angles. You use to decide whether two lines are parallel based on the knowledge whether corresponding angles or alternate interior angles are congruent is called deductive reasoning. Deductive reasoning is a process of reasoning logically from given facts to a conclusion. So it tells us if we know that both of these are congruent, then they must be parallel based on corresponding angles having to be congruent if they're on parallel lines. So that's deductive reasoning, using what you already know to be able to logically prove an answer. We want to know, is A parallel to B? And they want us to justify our answer. So go ahead and look at it, see what your thoughts are. Pause the video. So in this case, these two angles are on the inside and they're on opposite sides, so they are alternate interior angles. Alternate interior angles have to be congruent or exactly equal to each other if the lines are parallel. Well, 121 is not the same as 122. So, no, they are not parallel. And the parallel sign you can just remember because it looks like two L's, which is in the middle of parallel, but they're not equal because they are alternate interior angles and they don't equal each other. This one wants to know, for which value of X is line M parallel to line N? Okay, so we're going to take a quick look. 76 and X are both on the inside, and they're on opposite sides of the transversal that goes through. So they're alternate interior. Alternate interior lines our angles are congruent if their lines are parallel. Therefore, x must be 76 if m is parallel to n. So this particular one can look very overwhelming and can get us pretty confused. We are looking to see if A is parallel to B, so if these two are parallel, or which ones justify that C and D are parallel to each other. So we're going to take them slowly. Okay, we're going to first look at A if it is parallel to B. So I'm going to go ahead and look at these two. And then I'm going to start by eliminating one of my transversals. So for a few minutes, I'm going to ignore this side completely. So I just have two parallel lines and a transversal. Okay, so if angle 1 is corresponding, it would be corresponding to angle 9. So those two would be corresponding angles, and they would prove that those two are the same. Angle 6 is an alternate interior angle also to angle 9. So alternate interior angles are those two. We have an alternate interior angle of 5 and 10. We also can look at our other side now. So let's take a quick look. We're looking at line A and line B still. We're going to ignore this side. So if I can say that angle 3 and angle 11 are congruent, those are corresponding angles, and that would prove it. If I could prove that angle 7 and angle 12 were congruent, then because those are alternate interior angles, then I could prove that A and B were parallel. Okay, so now we're just going to look at C being parallel to D. So once again, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to draw in my C and my D, and I'm just going to use one transversal. So I'm going to use A first, and I'm going to ignore the bottom one. So as I'm looking at these, I'm going to take a look and I'm going to see which ones are going to work. Well, 5 and 7 are going to be corresponding angles. So those two would prove that C and D were parallel. If I had 3 and 6, those are alternate interior angles, and that would prove that they were parallel. Same way with 2 and 7. Those are also alternate interior angles and would prove that they are parallel. Angle 2 and angle 4 are corresponding angles, and that would also prove. So now let's look. If we have, if we have C and D, and we ignored the top transversal, then we could take a look and we could say angle 10 is alternate interior angles to angle 15. And that would prove that those two were, that C and D were parallel. Angle 12 and angle 10 are corresponding angles, and that would prove that C and D were parallel. So any of those would work. Now it wants to know if any lines are parallel, which ones are going to be parallel. Take a good look at it, then we'll talk. Okay, the very first thing that I noticed was that 93 and 93 are congruent. So I want to take a look and see what they look like. Well, these two look like they're on the inside of this one and this one. So those two are my parallel lines, and this one is my transversal. So that is proving that M is parallel to N. Notice when I make the parallel sign, it is larger, so it doesn't look like two L's. So those two are going to be parallel. And then I'm going to take a look, and I'm going to say 93 and 92. Well, those are corresponding angles, but those are not congruent. So they're corresponding if this is my transversal and these two are my two parallel lines, which means that P is not parallel to Q because these two are alternate interior and yet they don't equal each other. So first, find your transversal and whether or not you're talking about corresponding or alternate interior angles. Then find your two parallel lines that go off of your transversal, because this one we can ignore that N entirely. Okay, that is the end of 11.2. I hope you understand it. Ask me any questions that you need to in class.